Hello, everybody, and welcome to the return of Trips and Traps. It is the January 9th Trips and Traps at a snowy and chilly Aqueduct racetrack. Andy Serling. I'll be flying solo today. The weather has detained Richard Migliore, so unfortunately for you, you're stuck with me the whole show. We've got a whole lot to cover, though. We're going to talk about 7 races, and we're going to go all the way back to the 26th, the day we got back from our little Christmas hiatus, and go through the races that were run last week all the way through January 3rd. We'll start out, I believe, with the 7th race on January 26th, and I want to show the head-on of the start involving Slava and the 2 COLLEEN'S Sailor. Now, Slava, whose name I'll never pronounce correctly, stumbles very badly. I think it affects COLLEEN'S Sailor a little bit, who seems to bobble along with him. Now, COLLEEN'S Sailor doesn't have much speed. As we pick it up, and we'll show you the pan shot, and he's going to end up dropping out significantly as we break the race. You're going to see a very good job by Ruben Silveira staying on Slava, and that's a horse that has a lot of speed, and that's a stumble that significantly affected him and in some ways affected the race, because he's a horse that could have had the speed to at least make the leader, Lucky's Dream, who's faster than him early, but was allowed to set a very moderate pace, at least for him. Slava, a very good job by Ruben Silveira staying on, staying cool, getting him in good position behind him. The problem is he's now chasing wide against a pace that's very moderate, whereas perhaps if he had broken more sharply, maybe he pushes the race forward a little bit. He's able to A, save ground, and make the 8 go a little faster and create some more separation. He does run so badly, though, that I wonder if more was going on, as he was dropping in for a tag, and he was claimed out of this race for trainer Joe Imperio. He's out here. He's going to abdicate. There is COLLEEN'S sister. This is the horse, COLLEEN'S Sailor, excuse me, that I want to talk about more. COLLEEN'S Sailor is going to make one of these sort of mild, non-existent runs and have what could be construed as a somewhat meaningless gallop out, though I don't know that it is. And we're going to show you the gallop out where he basically cruises by everybody in here. Because when you look at the dynamics of this race, where Lucky's Dream dominated the front end, yes, he was the favorite. But the second horse, Doc Allman, was just under 40-1, the longest shot on the board. He was second the entire way around. There you see COLLEEN'S Sailor making almost no real dent in a race where the pace held together. But as we stay here, and we'll pick the horses up in the gallop out in a second, you're going to see COLLEEN'S Sailor really just sort of running by everybody. This is a horse that can be effective and has been effective going longer. Now, we don't have 7 furlong races, so you have to go 2 turns. But for trainer Chris Engelhardt, I think COLLEEN'S Sailor, a horse who last ran a synthetic at Woodbine, will be an interesting horse either in a sprint with a lot of pace or, more likely, in a route race where perhaps there appears to be a fairer pace. But I think in a route race, and don't forget, COLLEEN'S Sailor did not have a clean break. That's a horse that could be much closer to the pace, and I think COLLEEN'S Sailor is going to get some money, going to do well going forward. We will see what Slava does, but that is a horse that had no chance with the trip and the way the race played out. As we move forward to the 27th, and I want to talk about a race, the 8th race of the 27th, where Dream Saturday, the 8th horse, wires the field in a very strong pace. Charge Now, the 6, was the favorite, was I believe the favorite. It's the 2-1 favorite. I actually like what Junior Alvarado did, but it ends up, actually it was Dream Saturday was the 3. Because what happens here is there's another speed in the race, and that's Power World. And Power World, I believe, was the 7. If Power World doesn't go, it's going to allow Dream Saturday to dictate the race. So because of that, and knowing that Dream Saturday was a very, very dangerous horse, I think that Junior Alvarado was aggressive with Charge Now because he realized if I don't make a move towards this horse, he's going to really back it down, and then nobody's going to be able to catch him. So I appreciate the aggressive and thinking his ride out. The problem is, this turns out, is a very quick pace because not only did they go 23-4 the first quarter, which is pretty quick for a mile and 70, but they went 47-1 or 23-2 the second quarter, and that's the quarter that Charge Now is attacking in. And not only does Charge Now attack, but behind him attacking is Bad Hombre. And both of these horses, reasonable contenders, they're tired out from chasing a horse, Dream Saturday, who you can see on the front end, is just cruising along. And sort of more importantly, the horses that end up running second and third, They were 9th and 10th in the early running of this race, or 8th and 9th in a 9-horse field, excuse me. So you had a race that effectively melted down, which in some ways makes Dream Saturday's performance more important. And Ursalov in a second had some trouble, didn't break well, and had some trouble in the turn. But essentially, this race fell apart. And there's no tougher position to be in than to be the horse who's forcing outside and chasing in a race like this that falls apart, especially in the case where Dream Saturday held on. It reminds me in a funny way of a much more miniature version of Rachel Alexander's Woodward, a classic meltdown, where she was able to beat the dynamics. And I give a lot of credit to Dream Saturday, but I also think that Charge Now ran much better than it looks. And if he can get in a race where he's able to relax more early, I don't think he's as bad as this race will make him look, because he still finishes 4th in here. And I think you also have to take into consideration the 28th was a day that turned into a very strong inside bias. And I think there's a possibility the inside was the best place to be in the 27th. Not a strong bias. That may have helped the winner and also worked against Charge Now. Do not disregard him going forward. We'll turn our attention to a race in the 28th. And keep in mind, as we talk about this race, the 6th race, this was the goldest of gold rails that we have had. And I want to talk about the 8 Imposing Figure. And we're going to watch the entirety of the backstretch, because it paints a much different picture than you'll see in the head-on. He breaks a little slowly, he breaks out, he bumps the 9-horse, takes him out of position. It's interesting as we watch this head-on, and we're going to stay on the head-on the entire time down the backstretch. You get a very different picture watching this than you do in the pan. You realize that he's a legitimate 6 paths off the rail. I'm not really sure why Cruz was putting him in that spot. You wanted to be inside. He was trying to close. Regardless, he enters the turn way outside. As he shifts over, the horse, the 10, is shifting over, and he never is really even able to get to the absolute inside. Now we're going to take a look at the pan, and you'll be interested, I think, to see how much different the pan looks than the head-on we just viewed. You'll see him. He's got those very distinctive black colors with a sort of neon yellow sleeves. And watch him as he races behind horses, and keep in mind how much wider he is than you probably want to be in this racetrack. And this was a race, like many, that was one wire to wire, this one by the favorite Brass Pair. Imposing Figure. Here, it doesn't look, when you look at the pan, that he's 6 wide. He actually is. And amazingly, he isn't close to cutting in yet. He's still out in the middle of the racetrack as they go to the backstretch. So he's running against the bias. He had trouble early. He got taken out of position. He's steadying behind horses. And even here, as he's dropping over, he's not on the rail. He's actually in probably the 3 path at this point, and this is probably in the 3/8 pole position as he's moving around horses. So this is a horse that never saves ground. He's always off of the gold rail. He's having trouble. He seems to be out of sorts. This is a horse, given this trip, that I think it's reasonable to expect would have gotten beaten 30 lengths. And you still might want to take a look at him next time. Amazingly, he's still got run. Now he's ducking towards the good inside at this point, but he's not right on the rail. And it's almost like, at this point, Angel Cruz is just kind of guiding him. He's riding him. He's trying to get 4th with him, and he actually does get 4th. Very good job by Cruz to get him to anywhere here. But I think an even more amazing job by Imposing Figure, being able to finish 4th in this race, beaten just 7.5 lengths when you consider all of the events that took place, and then you throw in the strong rail bias. Imposing Figure is a horse for David Jacobson that in a similar spot on a fair racetrack, I think will be very hard to beat in a subsequent start. Now we're going to go to New Year's Eve and head forward to a horse, MACHA, who's caught a lot of attention, and I will not argue with anybody that says that MACHA should have won this stake race. This was the Bay Ridge, because MACHA, as you're going to see, breaks okay, but you see that horse in blue forces everyone over, and actually the rider does a good job on MACHA, and that's Irad Ortiz. He almost gets dropped there at that point. Now we're going to go around, and we're going to go to the pan, and we're just going to show you MACHA as he heads the first turn. You're going to see the steady from another vantage point, and you're going to see just how far it drops MACHA. And you see him with that pink hat. I don't need to circle him. He's dropping all the way back. You see Irad stumbles, great job staying on, has to pull the reins, and he sort of pulls this horse up, and as they go to the first turn, he's already a good 15, 20 lengths out of it. You're talking about a horse, I mean, look at how much, they're into the turn, he's just there. Now, we're going to pick the race up again around the top of the stretch, and you'll see he's actually made some headway to get closer, and it's amazing. He finishes 3rd, he's beaten just 3 lengths. I'm just a little concerned this race is going to prove a trap for people because I'm not sure how much I want horses out of this race going forward. JC's American Dream finished a nose behind him in fourth, 49-1. Royal Suspicion, with a wide trip, finished a neck back in fifth, 70-1. Hot Rendezvous off a long layoff at 17-1. He finished sixth, a neck farther back. Miss Narcissist, just under 50-1, finished behind them. It seems to me this race that got a 76 buyer is not necessarily going to prove that strong a race going forward. And I think a lot of people are going to say, and I have no argument, MACHA was the best horse in this race. But I think people may overestimate her going forward, and she is the kind of horse that might prove a trap if she's overbet in a subsequent start. Once again, you always have to see what the odds are when you make your play. Let's get into the new year. Let's get to January of 2015, and we're going to talk about the sixth race on January 2nd, and I want to talk about a hot first-time starter. And this is the two-horse one-sided for Mike Rapoli. And it's interesting to see the Rapoli Silks once again in a two-year-old race and losing to a race that are in the Klarovich Silks. And a similar situation we'll see in a later race, but I'm not so sure that it wasn't the Rapoli horse that may have run the better race ultimately. I am absolutely convinced that one-sided was the best horse in this race. This was a very fair racetrack. He is dueling hard inside of two horses. It's also worth noting that the two horses that he's dueling with in this race, one of them finishes 19 lengths behind him. The other one finishes 11 1/4 lengths behind him. He absolutely beat the dynamics of the race. Now, while Summer Hawk, who broke a little slowly, is a little wide, while the eventual second-place finisher, the 15, who broke very well, ends up running 5 wide. And, yeah, they did lose some ground, and I don't think that should be ignored. And I think both of them ran very well. But I'd rather have their trip sitting behind that very tough duel and being able to swoop than to be one-sided who's forced from the inside. And one-sided, he never gives up. I mean, he's fighting there into the 8th pole at this point. He only gets beaten 4 lengths in here. He did all the dirty work in a race that came up fast. I think the buyer was an 80 or 81. This was a good race. The horses that ran 1-2 are nice horses. But I still think that one-sided, who was the even money favorite in this race, even though he lost, I'm not sure they were wrong in making him an even money favorite. He was victimized by having that inside post and being forced through a very, very tough pace. It would be interesting to see what he would have had with a much cleaner trip. We'll look at the 8th race now, and this is the 8th race on January 2nd as this marathon Trips and Traps continues. And I want to talk about a horse, Sharp Quality, who was a trainer change for David Jacobson, I believe coming in from Delta Downs. And we will start out once again in this race with the head on because this horse, I mean, Angel Cruz, he does a terrific job. He stumbles to his knees. He reacts badly to it. They have to move the pan out to show how far out he is, but he also comes out of the irons. And you see him struggling to get the irons back. He does a terrific job getting back in the irons. And you're going to see more in the pan as we show the pan that he lost. First of all, I'm not sure this horse, she couldn't have had speed in this race. But she's going to lose 5-6 lengths easily because you think the rider is basically restraining her as he's trying to hold her back. She's bearing out badly. He loses the irons. The whole race is developing in front of him, and he's trying to get into his irons. What's he back now, 5-6 lengths? She's going to actually make what I thought was a pretty impressive run just to get back into the race as they head around the turn. Now, not only does she get back into the race, but she does it while racing 5 wide. So when you think about this race, and this was a race that got an 86 buyer. The horses that ran first and second, both Whiteley and True Romance, are talented horses. And this horse, Sharp Quality, who did not have the form down at Delta Downs to compete here, I think ran a hidden, very, very good race. She finishes 7th in here. She's actually only beaten 6.5, about 10 lengths in here. Well, considering the early trouble she had, and then you throw in the 5-wide trip, I mean, it's amazing when you think about it that at this point in the race, she is right on the leaders here. I mean, what if she doesn't break clean, doesn't break badly, and she's cruising along 3 in front at this point? I'm not so sure it's not a much different story. This horse, Sharp Quality, 21-1 in this race, and Cruz is riding her, but he realizes that he's got an empty tank. She is going to be a very interesting horse. And you also wonder if maybe having that outside post kind of worked against her. Frequently, it's good for a horse because she doesn't have the trouble of horses outside of her. In this case, the stumble, the bad bear out, and I think that Sharp Quality ran a sneaky, very, very good race in here. We're almost at the end. And this is another situation where we're going to see a Rapoli first-time starter uninfluenced. And this is the 6th race on January 3rd. Took a lot of money at 2-1. And the winner of the race was a Linda Racehorse run that benefited from being on the rail, and that's probably why it beat Madrus, who finished 2nd. But you've got the one Money Multiplier, who finished 3rd, who I think is going to be very good going forward. But you've got the 11, uninfluenced, on the outside, who, surprisingly enough, for a Pletcher first-time starter, and this horse, like the horse we talked about before, one-sided, both were training in Florida. This horse, uninfluenced, doesn't have a lot of speed. And you can see Gerard Ortiz getting after him a little bit. I think the rail was getting good maybe a little bit on January 3rd. He's out in a 4 or 5 path at this point. While Money Multiplier, who I do like going forward, and I'll get to the reasons for that, he gets a very, very good ride by Kendrick Carmouche, who I'm glad to see has joined this colony. He's back here, but more importantly, he's on the rail. Uninfluenced never gets a breather. He's always chasing, he's always being ridden, and he's always wide. I think he was an unusually sort of green horse for Todd Pletcher first time out. We expect much more professionalism, and I think he ran sneaky well to finish 4th in here. Now, I do think that Money Multiplier ran very well in here, and the reason you probably want him going further is twofold. You see him down on the inside. He's now behind horses there, while uninfluenced on the outside. The reason, despite the difference in trips, that you may want Money Multiplier going forward is you've got a Chad Brown first-time star in the dirt. So right away you're dealing with a horse that's probably going to improve with starts and time, and you're seeing him rally between horses. He's a half also to Intense Holiday, who is a router who I believe won the Louisiana Derby last year for trainer Todd Pletcher in Starlight Stables. So this horse should be stretching out and is probably going to improve with time and distance for the trainer. But with uninfluenced, even though it's Todd Pletcher who usually has him geared up the first time, he ran like a horse that needed a race, and I think he ran very well, chasing outside the whole way, not an easy thing to do. So while Money Multiplier is probably one that's going to have a good career going forward, I thought it was a very promising debut, I wouldn't give up on uninfluenced. I think he's a horse that didn't run badly here, and perhaps some will see his race as bigger disappointment than I think they should. That's 7 races from December 26th through January 3rd. It's snowing at Aqueduct. It's January 9th. Hopefully Richard Migliore and I will be back to do another Trips and Traps next week. But once again, we've got 3 days of racing. We can use your help. It's Trips and Traps at NYRAinc.com.